Scary. Bang! Now, as I was taught from the books that I've read, because I've never had any automotive mentor of any sort, you always press on the race which is in contact, in which case this would have been obviously the outer race. However, once it's in this knuckle, you can see the step there, you can access the outer race. So in this case, you're pressing through the bearing, and this is why you can never reuse this bearing. I don't think there'd be occasion you'd ever remove it if it wasn't unserviceable anyway, but in this case you're pressing through the bearing to actually remove it. Okay, so these are in fact the correct Circlips. There's the part number there, guys. I did in fact compare them with the original. Manual says you can't reuse it, so if you want to be particular, there's the part number. You'll need 2 of them if you're doing both sides, of course. Here's the number for the nut. They are different front and rear. If you're talking about an all-wheel drive, by the way, the nuts on the back side are actually on the aft end of the car are actually smaller. There's the part number for the nuts, and yeah, here's the part number for the Timken bearing. Here's the part number, and when you open the box, take the time to read any literature. You could be sorry if you don't. Right, this is a directional bearing, although it looks quite similar. It's not symmetrical in its look, but it's very similar. It would be easy enough to just throw this in either way. It will certainly fit. However, there is the ABS wheel speed sensor, right, sitting just under the shoulder there where the bearing goes. This is an encoder, as Suzuki refers to it. Baffling terminology in the manual, but what it basically is the little magnetic segments in the bearing that spin. Of course, when the wheel spins, this actually spins as well. You see the wee segments there? Magnetic sensitive card. Nickel particles in oil, I think, basically. And you can see the segments. So it is absolutely imperative. I didn't want to do much talking in this video, but it is imperative that this side of the bearing with the encoder faces the wheel speed sensor for obvious reasons, right? So I'm going to put a little slick. I've got my other bearing in the freezer actually at the moment. This one here is just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to freeze it just to shrink it a wee tiny bit. Believe it or not, it does make a difference. I should mention at this point, the manual does tell you to remove the ABS sensor, the wheel speed sensor there. Well, if you can get that out, good on you, because I've tried in the past. I cannot get these out come hell or high water. So as you can see, if you just remove the harness, and that's just a short harness, it's easy enough to do. You can just leave it in situ, because I think you can tell there it does sit below the shoulder, of course. Oh, if you don't have the fancy little if you don't have the, I mean, and who does have that little magnetic card, right? You can actually sense which one is any ferrous material, right? That's clearly a magnetic. And this one is magnetic through the race, but not on the seal itself, so be careful with that. The bearing is not touching the wheel speed sensor. The bearing is bottomed out, and of course, so again, we're on the outboard side of the bearing here now, guys, right? And of course, that's where the groove is for the Circlip. And I'm not going to be able to film this. I certainly can't do this with one hand. I'll show it to you once it's in situ, assuming I get it in situ. Circlip pliers, something of this nature here, guys. And there's the new clip in place. Okay, so the hub, of course, the inside race is stuck to it, right? Is pressed onto it. So I'm going to cut a couple of slits in here and see if I can chisel it off. It's just a matter of being patient. Yes, I am aware of the trick where you use the torch and spin it, and this will just drop right off. But that's predicated on the notion that you have an oxyacetylene torch, of course, which I don't. So this arrangement proved pretty effective, guys. Just a socket that's just a little bit smaller than the diameter here of the shaft on the hub, and of course just pound the living bejesus out of it with a chisel until you knock it off, right? So that worked. You don't have the factory tools. It's one of these gigs where you cobble something together until it does work. I was able to use the collar, but then I ran out of shims, so I only got about halfway on the shaft, and then this worked the rest of the way. So good. So here's the stack for the hub getting pressed back in, and it's absolutely critical that you hold the inside of the bearing here, because that's where the load is going to go through, the inside race. If you hold it on the outside here, you're going to crush the bearing up. Don't ask me how I know that. Okay, so it's critical that you hold the inside of the bearing, because that's where the force, of course, is going to go. You could do it you could put the stack the other way around if you're more comfortable, but this is more stable on my rig here, so and of course you'll feel it when it bottoms out. That's it, it's bottomed out. So again, it's critical that you keep that central, otherwise you'll crush the encoder. Okay, so there's the bearing in situ. You can see, of course, the encoder is rotating with the hub, the bearing, and you can see how it's situated gap-wise. That's all correct, and how you can see how this sits near flush here. That's correct. And the gap on the wheel speed sensor. Before I get carried away and torque everything up, I just want to ensure that everything's at least preliminary check the wheel speed sensing here. I'm just going to rotate the hub by hand here, and you can see there is wheel speed evident on the scan tool. So, and this is, of course, the right front wheel. So I'll carry on with the installation. Strut through bolts that go through the knuckle and the nut, torqued to item C, 101.5 foot-pounds. Pinch bolt for the bolt joint, item 1, A, 43.5 foot-pounds. And nut. Don't forget the cotter pin, of course, item 2, torqued to 32.5 foot-pounds. Put the brake assembly back together. The caliper carrier bolt, 61.5 foot-pounds, and the caliper pin bolt, 19 foot-pounds. So the drive shaft end nut there, don't reuse it, the manual says. Again, there's the part number for the front, and torque spec is 145 foot-pounds. Has to be cocked. Make sure you cock it after tightening. In other words, beat it over into the slot with a chisel. So there you go, guys, 140 pounds, and as I said, beat it over into the slot with your chisel so you lock the collar on the nut. And yeah, that should be it. Everything's torqued. Make sure you get the routing correct. Make sure it's tie wrapped and then through the panel. And everything's torqued up on the brake, of course. Make sure you give it a once over, make sure everything's good. And that's it. Now go repeat on the other side. That's it, boys. Cheers.